Distilled water is the cleanest water in the world, ladies and gentlemen. Distilled water is pretty much the definition of purity. It is remarkably clean, remarkably pure, and in my own personal opinion, and again, these are just my own opinions, very cleansing to the body, the mind, even the spirit. Distilled water, I remember years ago in my early 20s, I believe I was surfing YouTube and I found a video about distilled water. And this was right around the time that I was really getting into the health game and experimenting with herbs and things like that. And I was in Missouri and I was up late one night, was visiting family, and everyone had gone to bed and I was just surfing the web, looking for health tools and ways to improve my life and take care of my own health. And I believe I think it was either an article or a video that I found about distilled water, and something about that just spoke to me. And I took what little money I had in my bank account at the time and I invested in a mega home water distiller. I think I had like $300 in my bank account at the time. And I think the distiller was like $230 shipped. And that distiller was on the doorstep when I got home from Missouri. And I remember the first gallon of distilled water that I actually drank, there was a noticeable effect on the way that my body felt and my mind felt. I felt like it was easier to recall things. My memory was working a little bit better. And this may sound kind of crazy to some people, but when you really look at what's in tap water, if you really take a good look at what's even been found in filtered water and bottled water and things like that, it's pretty shocking. And all of these things have an effect on the physiology in one way or another. You know, fluoride, chlorine, chloramines, all these compounds that are in the water, and it's much more than just chlorine and chloramines, folks. These constituents have a negative health impact on our body, on our gut flora, on our blood, on our bone system. So I'm not really going to get into that in this video. I want to just focus on distilled water. But I was just amazed that after the first gallon of distilled water that I drank, I noticed a subtle change in the way I felt, in my memory recall, and my sharpness of mind. And after about a month of continuing to drink distilled water, my life had my creativity, had blossomed. It had mossed massively. So distilled water improved my skin tone. It improved my sharpness of mind, my memory recall. It just made me feel healthier. And these experiences that I had with distilled water really motivated me to experiment quite heavily with distilled water over a multiple year period. And I still drink it. I don't drink it as much as I used to because I drink a lot more water now and I have a family and we use well over a gallon of water a day between, because I like to not only drink clean water, but I like to bathe in it. I like to clean the dishes with clean water. And in order for you to have enough distilled water to be able to do all that, you're going to have some huge distiller. Again, a gallon of distilled water can take up to 4.5 hours to 5 hours just to distill 1 gallon of water. So I still drink distilled water, but I also incorporate filtered water. But this is just such a huge game changer, ladies and gentlemen. Water in general is something that I think most people overlook. I think most people think that, water's water. That is so far from the truth that it would make the average person's head spin. If you go to there's a link in the description box of this video to the Environmental Working Group. If you live in the United States, you'll be able to access this website and type in your area code, and it will tell you pretty much what's in your area code. If your area code in your city and where you live has been entered into the database. And most people who do this, and they're shocked. There's runoff, pollution, chemical toxicities, algicides, cobalts, radioactive components, chlorine, chloramines. The chlorine and the chloramines especially affect your gut flora and your gut microbiome. And because your brain's connected to your gut, ladies and gentlemen, if you pollute your gut, you pollute your brain. So I do believe that water is used as a weapon against the expansion of consciousness. Personally, I do believe that there is an agenda in this world to keep the Kundalini energy from evolving and awakening within humanity. Kundalini energy is something that I talk about in so many of my videos, and I'm not going to discuss it in this video because I want to stay on point. But Distilled water, there's a huge disinformation agenda about distilled water. People think that if they drink it, they're going to strip minerals from their body, and people think if they drink distilled water, they're going to have some horrible health consequence. Ladies and gentlemen, no one's asking you to drink nothing but distilled water. Nobody's asking you to just sit there and guzzle multiple gallons down. Distilled water is devoid of minerals, but distilled water goes into your system, and the water acts like a conduit, and it grabs onto toxicities, and it helps flush out poisons. Again, I'm not saying that this is the truth. I'm saying that for me personally, these are my beliefs based on my own experiences. So don't take these pieces of information and think that they're like scientific fact, because they're not. I'm telling you my own anecdotal experience, and there's multiple people out there who have had massive benefit take place in their life, just like I did, from drinking distilled water. So use a little bit of discernment and navigate through this world and do what you think is best. Some people will never drink distilled water. They think it's just a total poison. Distilled water, I drank for years without minerals, and then after a while, I intuitively felt like I should start adding minerals back to the water. So what I do currently is I take distilled water and I add Celtic sea salt to it, and I'll add some fulvic acid or some, it's the name of the brand. Omica Organics has a mineral product that I add about 20 to 40 drops. There's so many different ways that you can remineralize distilled water. But so technically, I guess I don't actually drink distilled water anymore, considering most of the time, about 9 out of 10 times, I am adding minerals back to it. But I had for so many years, I can't say it's so many years, because it was about 3 to 4, maybe 4.5 years where I was drinking distilled water pretty much without minerals added to it. And I had massive benefit. So distilled water, no one's asking you just to sit there and drink water without minerals. I mean, be creative. Drink filtered water if you want. Do the research. Do what speaks to your soul. But I tell you what, most of the people who drink distilled water are people who believe in the power of it and have had nothing but benefit take place in their life from drinking it. So before you go off and think that all these articles and all these slander campaigns against distilled water are truth, don't be so stimulated by the fear response and think that just because one article says something's bad, that it's bad. We do live in a world where things are often misconstrued and bent. And I mean, come on, ladies and gentlemen, it's just water. Distilled water is just nothing but H2O. Again, there's this huge fear-based kind of slander campaign going on within the distilled water community. People think that because it has no minerals, it's going to go bind to minerals in your system and leach minerals out of your system, and you're going to get sick and all this. Ladies and gentlemen, the role of diet, the things that you put into your mouth to eat, that is where you're supposed to get the majority of your minerals. Sure, you can get minerals from water as well, but drinking some distilled water is not going to kill you, folks. Man, do I think that you could probably overdo it? I'm not 100% sure. I have never experienced that. But again, I drink filtered water, I drink distilled water, and I drink distilled water that's been restructured and had minerals added back to it. So I've done something a lot different than most people do with distilled water. Many people who drink distilled water just drink pure H2O distilled water, no minerals added to it. I add minerals back to it. I also add oxygen back to it, and I add crystal energy back to it. I vortex the water. I use distillation as a way to get rid of all the bullshit. All of the garbage that doesn't belong in the water is stripped out through distillation. And then once my water is pure and it's just H2O, 0 parts per million, 0 total dissolved solids, and I have a meter to check these, I start spinning, or I start vortexing the water to bring oxygen and energy back into it. And then I add the minerals and the crystal energy, and I pray over my water. I put a lot of time and effort into the things that I consume, because I know that the things that I consume directly affect my health, the health of my entire 100 trillion plus cells. And let me tell you, water is used as a messaging system inside of your system. Your cells actually use water to transmit messages back and forth between one another. So when you drink water filled full of a bunch of metals and toxicity and bullshit and chlorine, you are effectively coagulating and damaging not only your tissues and your blood but you're damaging your cells. And when you damage your cells, the basic building blocks of your body, you damage every component within the cells. All of the organelles. Organelles means little organs. Your cells actually have little organs, ladies and gentlemen, like your mitochondria, which is basically your cell's engine, so to speak. You damage your nucleus, the cytoplasm. Water is very important. Pure water is very important. So I'm not here to tell you how to drink or to drink distilled water. I'm just telling you that I've had some great results with it, folks, and many people have as well. And I drank distilled water. In my early 20s, the majority of the water that I consumed was distilled water without minerals added, but I was also drinking some filtered water here and there, which I'm sure had some minerals, and I was eating a very mineral-rich, mineral-laden, mineral-dense diet. I wasn't worried about drinking distilled water, and I wasn't worried about this, oh, it's going to leach minerals from my body, because I was eating so many minerals. And on top of that, it's not like I was even consuming enough distilled water every day to flush my body's minerals out. The body is very intelligent, and it knows what to hold on to. I was drinking at tops about a gallon a day, but usually about a half gallon to 3/4 of a gallon, depending on how much I was exercising and things like that. But I would use distilled water to make teas as well. Essentially, if you're making tea from distilled water, when you put the hot water in the tea bag, the minerals from the tea is going to leach out into the water. So that's not technically 100% distilled water, because distilled water, by definition, is water that's had all of its minerals taken out of it. But I restructure my distilled water, as I've said throughout this video. I've mentioned this multiple times throughout my channel, but I just wanted to say that for years I consumed distilled water without minerals and I was fine. In fact, I think that it did a lot of benefit for me. Compared to filtered water, compared to even alkalized water ran through ionizers and all this other fancy stuff, I think distilled water is the cleanest form of water. I think it's the purest form of water. And reading Dr. Norman Walker's book, Water Can Undermine Your Health, it's a little yellow book, that really inspired me to start drinking distilled water. In that book, he goes on to say that in each state in the United States, there's usually over 300 to 500 excessive contamination violations in the water supplies. The water is not clean, ladies and gentlemen. Have you ever looked at a pipe that the water comes through into your house? I've been on job sites. I've looked at old corroded pipes where there's just been excessive mineral and calcium buildup. How could water like that be healthy for you? If anything, that type of water is what's going to destroy your health. That type of water is what's going to leach minerals out of your system, because it has chlorine and chloramines and all this other insane garbage bullshit that doesn't belong there. You're going to tell me that drinking nothing but H2O is unhealthy while you guzzle down filtered water that still has chlorine and fluoride and all the other bullshit in it? You're going to tell me that distilled water is unhealthy while you drink tap water filled full of toxic runoff and different heavy metal particulates and cancer-causing components? Come on, ladies and gentlemen, use your mind. It's nothing but water. If you're afraid of distilled water, add some minerals back to it. But for me personally, I believe when I started drinking distilled water, I felt like I had years of detoxing to do. Not necessarily detoxing, but cleansing. Distilled water went into my system and helped flush out toxicity. In my opinion, again, I have to say that, otherwise I can get in trouble. Distilled water helped me purify my vessel. When you distill water, you boil water in a boil kettle, and the steam rises and it condenses as it rises up a coil, and all of the heavy particulates, all of the toxic garbage that you don't want in the water is too heavy to rise with the steam, and it stays inside the boil kettle. If I remember right now, I'll put a video overlay on this video showing you guys just how disgusting that boil kettle is after you distill, a few gallons of tap water. The entire boil kettle will become yellow and lined with flaking and mineral buildup and garbage, and the stuff smells horrible. You do not want that stuff in your system. And I've compared filtered water to distilled water, folks, and distilled water is without a shadow of a doubt much cleaner 9 out of 10 times. I'm not saying that there aren't amazing water filtration systems out there, because there are. But I've taken filtered water from 6-7 stage RO units from health food stores where you can go fill up your jug. I've taken that stuff home and distilled it, and I've pulled massive amounts of waste out of it. So that water that's filtered, it still usually has fluoride in it because the fluoride compound is so small that it goes right through the filter membrane. I've even distilled gallons of water up to 3 or 4 times and then rebuilt the water. I put my water through a complete restructuring process where I expose it to certain sounds and frequencies and minerals. It's a very alchemical process, but it starts with the base of distilled water. So this video has been kind of scattered. I'm going to wrap it up, you guys. I just wanted to talk a little bit about this subject because I find it very interesting. Distilled water really pushed me through the door. Distilled water and cayenne pepper were really the gateway constituents into my life of health. I mean, I started this journey more than 10 years ago, and I'm still just as interested in it. In fact, I'm more interested in it. Health can consume you in all the right ways, and it can teach you how to be a responsible individual in a world where morals are lacking. Peace be with you all.